So I intentionally didn't make a video on this when it came out, so I could talk about it afterwards, and that's what we're going to do here today. They did a probably the biggest change they've ever made in season during any Mythic Plus season, and yeah, I'll give you my thoughts on it because I think this is a crucial thing. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it too, especially those who are, below and also those who are above my progression level, because I think it's going to matter a different amount for each different type of player out there. And yeah, if you haven't heard, I'll quickly summarize the on death affix of 15 seconds of penalty for every death, which, just to be perfectly clear here, I hate and I believe should be removed coming in the following season. I think it's a baseless decision. I think they just wanted to make keys harder in general because they were worried that the affixes were adding a lot of time. And without the old affixes, then you wouldn't have any real challenge in terms of the timer, and it would be hard for them to balance the timer. I think this was always a cop out for them. I thought, if they were better at actually creating the dungeon timers, then they wouldn't need this sort of thing because obviously it's hard to balance it at a low level, right? Like if you think about it, the death scaling affix thing, this is actually kind of clever from them because the higher up you go, the more likely it is that you're going to die, right? So it's actually making the timer more and more tight as you go up in level, just theoretically, because you'll be in more and more danger. And especially when you get to a point where your gear is now significantly challenged, like your health pool is not comfortable enough, then yeah, you just pretty much can't succeed in that key level at all. And I think this is, again, response to things like bolstering or sanguine, which used to add minutes to every dungeon. Not there's no affixes like that now, really. Well, not at least above 12, obviously. So I think that's why they added it. A lot of people suggested they should only have it for 12 and up, that they should have swapped at some point, like the different affix sets and when they broke in. But either way, I don't really care. Like all arguments, I don't validate. Like this is a dumb fix. It shouldn't have existed in the first place. Like there shouldn't have ever been a 5-second penalty for it. I believe that this is, ridiculous concept. I think they added it in the first place because they knew that people were doing death skips back in WoD challenge modes, and there's just some kind of knee-jerk reaction in Legion to make sure people didn't still do that when the content was meant to be a more competitive thing. Like, I think you have to understand from Blizzard's perspective, like they don't want to showcase people just dying over and over again as success. I think that's bad for their brand and it's not good for their esports scene. So anyway, that's probably why I was in, and it just got elevated to 15 seconds. Yeah, I've said all I can say on that now. So instead of removing it, and we'll talk about what that, why they didn't remove it in a second, but instead of just removing it, they made it now give you 90 free seconds to every key level where it applies. And this is the equivalent to 6 free deaths, effectively. So, yeah, I mean, 90 seconds is substantial. This would be the biggest timer change ever if you can just look at it for that. There have been timer changes in the past, like especially downward, but a lot of times upward too. A dungeon getting a whole minute added to it would be like, whoa, I can't believe they added a whole minute. Yeah, we got 90 seconds, so that's a minute and a half. Pretty crazy. I mean, Dawnbreaker and Eric those dungeons already were very, very lenient. I guess they didn't want to retune some of the dungeons. Like, I think in reality, they should probably be looking at the dungeons with the highest death rates. Like, because I think if you're going to look at it this way, right now, you need to start thinking the game in this direction. Like, if deaths are a currency, effectively, then you need to be tuning that currency. So if you say like Dawnbreaker is the most lenient dungeon, but it has the highest death rate, then it's balanced. But if you say, Mr. Turner Scythe is the tightest timer, but it has the lowest death rate, then, you could also say that's balanced, right? Like you have to look at it from a different perspective now than you ever have had to before. Because yeah, the deaths have become a currency in Mythic Plus, and a lot of times you look at it and say, well, there's 7 deaths, it's probably over. Just by kind of just thinking about how much time you just lost, right? Like if you looked at it and said 7 deaths before, it's like that's just too much time, bro. Like we lost 2 minutes now. You know what I mean? Like it's just not enough. So yeah, I think a lot of groups were falling prey to that before. Now, why did they not remove it? I think, a lot of people say like this is Blizzard refusing to admit defeat on this. I don't think it's anywhere near that dramatic. First of all, like this is not that big of a deal. It's not like, there's been so many other controversies. We don't need to go through all of them again, but Yeah, there's a lot of times when, the community wants to do something mob mentality wise, and Blizzard just doesn't want to do that. So they kind of do something to hopefully get them to stop talking about it. And then they don't stop talking about it. And then they ultimately have to do the thing that the community wanted because the fucking community is just filled with entitled children who won't shut up about stuff they want. So, anyway, this is not one of those situations. This is really not that big of a deal. It's just not a good decision. And it's never been a good decision. I gave feedback on this back on the beta when they first announced it. So why did they not get rid of it? Like, let's just assume that they actually want to get rid of it, because I do think they do, given the veracity of this change. Like, this is a very heavy-handed change. I think that means they do want to get rid of it. I think structurally it can't be removed. I don't think they could just remove an affix like demarcation in the middle of a season. Even if we're assuming that it can't physically be done, like obviously from like the code standpoint, I'm sure it can be done. I don't know anything about how that works. Like when every dungeon already has this on it, how do you like what do you do there? Like because that's the problem, right? Like if you want to get rid of this, and does that just invalidate every other run? Like because now all of a sudden every run is going to be wildly easier, like way easier. So I don't know. There's been some like hot takes from apparently some other content creators saying that that this is actually working well, and that you shouldn't be able to survive a wipe in a Mythic Plus. Now I don't know the exact quotes and stuff, but this is the general sentiment that have people been throwing at me to react to. And I think in general, it's going to depend a lot on the key level, right? If somebody's saying this who's doing a 15 instead of a 12, they have a more valid point. Like, yeah, okay, if you're doing a 15 and you can actually wipe and still upgrade that key, yeah, that's probably, that's not a very well balanced timer. But if you're doing a 12 and you think you shouldn't be able to wipe and upgrade a key, that's kind of silly. That's just not how the game works. Obviously the upper echelon of levels should not separate us that much that at the lower levels we're also demanded of perfection. And then certainly below 12, if you think you shouldn't be able to wipe and succeed, then you're just out of like, I mean, that's just out of left field. Like that's totally out. Like you can't say that ever with a straight face. So I think the point here is that the affix itself puts unnecessary pressure on the group, and socially, it's a huge problem. Now, in terms of the timer, and talking about that concept there, I don't really understand why people think that this is a good idea from that perspective, because if you look at a timer, it's just a fact. Like it's just 1 second every, it just ticks infinitely, right? Like there's no way to stop it. There's no way to improve it. Like you can't get time back. It's a very like a factual, like it gives you the information you need. They did a good job with this on this front because the timer works really well on that front. Like, and the thing I don't like about this is if you're in there for 30 minutes real time and that does not count as 30 minutes real time because of other bullshit taking time away, it's just not like this is not intuitive to me. I don't like this. Okay. So I don't like if I start the dungeon seeing 30-minute timer and then I realize we've been in there for 27 minutes, but we failed it because of the deaths. Like that's not for me. Okay, I don't like that at all. And so you could say the same thing on the other side of it, right? Like if you're in there for 30 minutes, you should always succeed. And if you're not in there for 30 minutes, like if you're in there for more than 30 minutes, you should always fail, right? And I think that's what needs to come back here. Like I think that really is where this should have stopped, and is really the end point for this topic, is that they kind of created this situation where there's no way to work around this other than just not die. Like there's and deaths are very common. Like we made a whole video about this at the end of Dragonflight there. Like it's very common that there are many deaths, and I think Blizzard's putting undue social pressure on the people. Again, totally unaware that there are puggers out there, because right now, like deaths can cause a disband, even if like deaths could buff you and people would still get mad at people. You know what I mean? Like it's that way. Like we have multiple keys just from this week, but literally on the whole season, we have dozens of keys where like a few people die a couple times, and that's just it. Like it could be 3 individual deaths on one person, and that breaks the key from a variety of reasons. Like that person could be tilted. We just had this. Yeah, I think it was the last key we even did. This paladin died 4 times before the first boss, and he just pulls the plug, just logs off. You know what I mean? 4 deaths before one boss, not great, right? But does that mean the key's over? Absolutely not. Especially not considering we just got 6 free deaths. Could be the other way around. Could be 4 deaths on that one paladin, and then everybody starts flaming the guy, and now that's the key, you know? Or it could be one of these situations where one guy just keeps dying over and over again, and he just refuses to get better. Like, there's so many different ways that deaths are already punishing you, and there's no real way to improve on them. Like, I can't play the guy's character for him. I can't, like, unless we're wiping, like, there's not much anybody else can do, you know what I mean? The guy needs to just potentially play better, and the healer maybe needs to play a little bit better, and then everybody probably needs to maybe do a little bit more interrupting or protecting him or something like that. But there's very, very little you can control in that way. So when you add this, the situation here where now one death is now 3 times worse, right? Like it shouldn't even be 3 times. It should be, 150 times worse because there shouldn't have ever been a timer in the first place. But regardless, it's now worse than it was in the past. Then you start amplifying that, and that causes more and more disband. So it's all been one long rant to say that I hate the affix and it should have been removed, but it probably couldn't have been removed. And I think anybody saying that it's working well is being disingenuous because there's already plenty of ways to improve your timer. So this is what I was trying to get at here this whole time. Like, there's plenty of ways to improve your timer. You can do better DPS. You can be more efficient with your skips. You can, bloodlust more. You can try to use potions more frequently. There's a million ways to improve your actual theoretical time, but there's not really a lot of ways to lower your average death count. Like, you know what I mean? Like, unless you're starting to get way more gear or you're making a massive mistake, you're going to have deaths. They almost feel inevitable. Like, to do a dungeon with no deaths is extremely rare. And I believe I've only done one all season. And that video is published. If you haven't seen that Stone Vault, that was I think it was only our second 12. But we did upgrade our first 13. So, what are my thoughts on the affix? Okay, we're back to this. The affix changes, that is. The affix changes. I had hoped that it was actually going to nerf the dungeons. I thought, we're going to have a better time progression-wise. Unfortunately, it really hasn't been true. We did finally finish all 12s other than Grim Toll, so we got a little bit of success there, but the stranger thing about that is some of them got given to me. Siege of Brawls got given to me. I don't know. I guess how it worked is if you finish a dungeon with more than or less than 90 seconds left on the timer, then you now upgraded it because it just changed in, retrospection. So that is fine. That's how it works, by the way. Another good reason to stay in every key you do. Like, think about how many keys you may, or anybody may have left that were going to be less than 90 seconds at a time. That you just cost yourself a lot of score, especially if they were hard keys. Like, if you got to the last boss of Stone Vault and it looked like it was out of time and you rage quit, guess what? You know what I mean? Like, that was a huge mistake on your part. So, yeah. Anyway, I think like that's normal. This happens all the time. By the way, this is not something unique to this situation or this season. Anytime they add time to the dungeon, this is true. Always a good reason to stay in keys, especially if you think the key is tight and potentially due for a time increase. Like in Dodie, we saw that with Rise of Galakron. Really interesting. Same thing happened there. A lot of free time we got. But anyway, I think that this should theoretically make disbands less. And I hoped that it would make upgrades more, and it did not do that. It did make disbands less, a lot less. The statistics this week were significantly better, but I don't necessarily think, I think it could have just been totally RNG. Like, I think we just did, now that we're doing 13s again, like instead of 12s, we're signing up to more Eric Harris or more dungeons that were more likely to get to the end point. But I think on top of that, it is true that like when you have that extra 90 seconds, I think it confuses a lot of people into thinking that they might still upgrade it, because we see this all the time where people like it. I mean, to me, it's clear, like way over time. Like, we're going to be like 3 to 5 minutes over time, and then people stay for like another 10 minutes before they realize it. And that's yeah, I hate that, because if you're going to leave and you're going to waste my time, then don't waste even more of my time staying and then leaving later. But anyway, I like that because it also kind of gets us to the finish line sometimes. Every once in a while, you end up winning that side of that, because that guy who might have left as soon as that one mistake happened, he might be tricked into staying. Well, now he's actually too stupid to realize that he's staying for a key that's not in time, and he just stays the whole way. But anyway, that's just me assuming any of those things are happening. I do think that the timer change is a good one. And like I said, it's a very heavy handed one in the way that they've never made such a bulk change to this difficulty before. This is now the second massive nerf to 12 and higher. And that's why I asked for feedback on 11 and lower, because I do think it's probably going to be a wildly different experience down there. Like those timers were already very lenient. Last time I remember doing them, it was like very easy to double upgrade a lot of 11s. A lot of people were doing that. If you remember, double upgrading 11s was actually the only way a lot of people were getting score for a while, because 12s were that hard. And then they did nerf 10, the 10% scaling on that 12 affix. And now they've nerfed the timer by 90 seconds all around. So, and then I guess my other question is like, what does 7 look like now? Because 7 and 8s, I can't even imagine how easy they were in terms of a timer, and now they got 90 seconds as well. So yeah, it's curious. Let me know if anybody has any crazy moments out there with those timers, and how it worked. But yeah, I basically logged on and got like, I think it was like at least 50, maybe even closer to like 70 free points. I don't remember where I ended last week, but I logged on this week and I was, yeah, very, like I was almost 100 points past. Now after all this, I'm almost 100 points past where I was at the end of last week. So yeah, this very we got a lot for this. So I think everybody's probably gotten a full key level, no matter where you're at. You're now like one full key level ahead, but now it's just 13s that are hard and 12s than before 12s, you know. So I don't really think it makes the game any easier from the pug world. I don't think it's an improvement for the pug world, because people are still very apt to just give up, or failures. So now you see 20 deaths instead of 10, because people are like staying longer. But I think in general, it's obviously made progression easier. I just don't like, I think a lot of people look at it this way. I try not to look at it this way, but in this case you have to look at it this way. I try not to look at me versus the global scale. Like, people say like, well, what's your world rank, right? So whatever, I'm sub 200 now apparently after these changes. Before I was above 200. So it's just like, did people just not play yet this week? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really look at it that way. I don't care. I don't, those other 200 people don't matter to me. I don't know them. I've never met them. I'm not going to play with them. I'm not going to play against them. It's not a head to head competition for me. It's all about my personal progression. I would encourage everybody to act that way, frankly. So, this is a buff to your personal progression, but it is a buff to everybody's personal progression. So it's kind of hard not to say like they just kind of moved the difficulty goalpost in that way, and it's not really changed. Like nothing has effectively changed here. But the one good side of this is that hopefully, the people who are apt to leave after one failure will now stay for a little bit longer. I think there was kind of like this, almost, this thing hanging over us here where it's like, oh, well, we just cannot sustain a failure at all. So now we can. And people have said that in this week's runs, like, oh, don't forget, we got 6 free deaths, basically. So it's true. Like, that's just factually true. And people are like, oh, yeah, okay, 6 free deaths. We'll stick around. But how long is that going to last? Like a couple weeks from now, people will forget this change even happened, and then they'll just be, acclimated to the new timers, and they'll think like these ones are the only ones, that ever existed. So a failure is still a failure, and now I hate the dungeon again. But I don't know. They're just my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think. I think this was the biggest change they've ever made, and I think that this affix its days are limited. And in season 2, which we're gonna probably get an announcement for, I think it's November 12th or 13th or something like that. They're doing a big Blizzard Direct. Make sure you are staying tuned to the stream that day, because I will be watching that live and giving my live reaction right after that. I imagine they'll be announcing seasonal stuff for season 2, so probably not the affix changes, but I'd imagine there's going to be a lot more changes to come. So thank you for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.